Welcome everyone. This morning I wish to speak about two topics and hopefully I can relate them. They're very related inside of me. And I'm actually continuing with the theme that we've had the last couple of weeks. Sanghamitta spoke about metta practice, and last week I spoke about fostering friendship and the Buddha's instructions about sustaining favorable relationship. And actually one of the translations often used for metta is loving friendliness. Loving friendliness. A definition that my meditation teacher uses that works really well for me, especially when I'm trying to bring in metta to deal with something that is more challenging, more difficult, internally or externally, is the definition of acceptance. And I think that it goes along with a lot of the theme in the Buddha's teachings. It struck me when I first came to the Buddha's teachings that he talks about non-greed, non-ill will, non-cruelty, just abating the negative is already so huge. And this definition of metta as acceptance, I think, captures that. This is every meditator must, in their own way, develop some flavor of this acceptance, some flavor of this metta for their own mind, for their own obstacles. So much of our difficulty, so much of our suffering, so much of our twisting and contorting and contracting has this flavor of resistance, has this flavor of pushing away, and that is aversion. And metta really is the antidote. It really is the medicine. Metta is a medicine. It's a medicine that we have this incredible privilege to be being offered. And may we take the medicine of metta. And I quote it all the time. It's one of my favorite passages when the Buddha gives this simile of our practice of taking up a spiritual practice, taking up meditation, of taming our inner voices, taming our mind, taming our heart. He gives this beautiful analogy, simile of the elephant tamer and the wild elephant. And indeed, our inner life is this wild elephant until we begin to work with it. And it begins by just meeting it. But he describes how the elephant tamer begins to interact with this wild elephant. And he gives these 6 adjectives, which is so common. So often the Buddha wants to make sure at least one of them really resonates for us. So he talks about speaking to this wild elephant, speaking to our internal experience, meeting our internal experience with words and I think a tone, right? Words in a tone that are gentle and that are pleasing to the ear and that are lovable as go to the heart, that are courteous, they're desired by many and agreeable to many. This is taking that medicine of metta. And just to get us really on board of how important metta is, on beginning to love and beginning to value and beginning to cultivate this quality of attention, this approach to life. This is from the Connected Discourses, in Pali, the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's in chapter 20, Sutta 4, pots of food, short. This is one of our similes today. At Savatthi, mendicants, if someone were to give away 100 pots of food as charity in the morning, 100 pots of food as charity at noon, and 100 pots of food as charity in the evening, and if someone else were to develop a mind of loving kindness, a mind of metta, a mind of acceptance, even for the time that it takes to pull a cow's udder, either in the morning or at noon or in the evening, this would be more fruitful than the former. The Buddha really wants us to understand this beautiful heart quality of metta, to value it and to learn how to cultivate it. And there's now a simile that I don't want to punch us in the heart. I don't want to hit us over the head, but the Buddha does at certain times. And this is a sutta I honestly scared the bejeebies out of me when I first read it, and I thought I would never teach this from this sutta. And here I go, because I actually think there's tons to learn. Not just about metta, honestly, but about our whole spiritual practice. So it's a little bit long, but I actually can't reduce it, or we don't get the whole picture. But this is at the very end of a fairly long sutta. In the middle length discourses, the suttas are slightly longer in this middle length discourses than often in the connected discourses. And this is at the end of sutta number 21, simile of the saw. And the Buddha is talking to the monks. When others address you, their speech may be, there's 5 things. It may be timely or untimely. That's the first pair. When others address you, their speech may be true or untrue. That's the second pair. When others address you, their speech may be gentle or harsh. That's the third pair. When others address you, their speech may be connected with good or with harm. That's the fourth pair. When others address you, their speech may be spoken with a mind of metta, a mind of loving kindness, or with inner hate. That's the fifth pair. Here in Mendicants, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. This is the high bar of the response. We shall abide pervading that person who spoke to us, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And starting with them, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind filled with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train mendicants. And here comes the clincher. Mendicants, fasten your seatbelts. Even if bandits were to sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, one who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Here in Mendicants, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected. You're cutting off my arm. My mind will remain unaffected. And we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of metta, loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall abide, pervading them with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Starting with them, we shall abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train mendicants. This bar is like insanely high. And there are a few other passages in the Buddhist teachings that just seem honestly unreachable and almost unrealistic. And yet I think I can unpack it that we don't have to dismiss it. I think the Buddha knew what he was doing, because actually he goes on to say that if we remember that teaching, that ridiculously high bar of like if someone was cutting off my leg and cutting off my arm, that I'm going to remain unaffected. The way that he wants us to use that is, he goes on, mendicants, if you keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind, and he even names it, you know, when you name something, the simile of the saw, when you name something, it becomes an item. It becomes something that your neural network, you know, finds a place to put it. We've all had this experience, right? You learn a word or you learn a phenomena, and then suddenly, like, why is everyone now talking about this? Mm-hmm. It's because now you hear it, because now it lands, because now there's a hook for it. So the Buddha named this simile, and that he doesn't often. He just says, remember this teaching, you know, thus you should train yourself. No, he goes, remember this advice. Remember this story about the simile of the saw. If you keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind, do you see any course of speech, trivial or gross, that you could not endure? It's so cool, eh? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not being cut up, you know? I can handle this. The guy's sort of being mean, but I can handle it because I'm not being, you know, he's not cutting off my arm. And there's not two of them with a two-handed saw. No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, mendicants, you should keep this advice on the simile of the saw constantly in mind. This will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. It's a stunning teaching technique. And I'm gonna read about someone who did this in real life. And these examples that we have of living beings that reached a very, very beautiful, extent of the human potential. They're like north stars for us, and they can, if we orient correctly, they can fuel us and propel us to great beauty. So there's this Tibetan Buddhist monk, and his name's Palden Gyatso, and he spent 33 years imprisoned by the Chinese and drew deep on his Buddhist practice to survive his brutal treatment. And he was released from prison in 1995 and went on to write a memoir. And this is pulled from an interview after his memoir was published. So following Palden's release from prison in 1995, the Tibetan underground smuggled him out of the country along perilous escape routes over the Himalayas. They hoped he would tell the world about his experiences in the Tibetan Gulag. Since then, he has testified before a United Nations tribunal. He's addressed pro-Tibetan protests in the West, and, with the help of his translator, Tir Singh Shakya, written a memoir entitled Fire Under the Snow. The story describes how a man's humanity survives the extreme inhumanity of his captors. How had he been able to avoid hating the Chinese? In an interview, after Tsering had translated a question about this, Paulden shook his head vigorously. The interviewer had not really understood. It's not, and this is Paulden now clarifying, it's not that I was without hatred, especially when I was being tortured by my guards. I had immense hatred against them because I was being hurt. But as a religious person, after the event, I could reflect on what had happened. I could see that those who inflicted torture did so out of their own ignorance. As a religious person, I have to sit back and ask myself, what is all this? Buddhist teachings say, don't let your calm be disturbed, and do not respond to anger with anger. These are Paulden's words. And then the interviewer reflects on it. Theory is one thing, but Paulden's ability to put this into practice is remarkable. And indeed. But I'm very encouraged that not encouraged, but it's much more relatable to me that he wasn't able to actually reach this high bar of like, while it is happening, just have this heart that's full of love and unaffected. He's like, no. It was excruciating, and I was pushed to the limit. And yet I have these Buddhist teachings, and after the fact, when I'm by myself and when I can resource in prison, which is having been tortured multiple times, 33 years. But he continually, cleaned out the aversion and replaced it with wisdom. The wisdom that his torturers were tortured themselves. They were tortured. They were tortured by the system that they were in. They were tortured by the commands that they were being given, and then they were tortured by having to act them out. They were tortured, and so was he. The whole thing was torturous. And with that clear understanding, he was able to continually, flush out the heart, clean it out. And this is key, that this understanding of pain produces pain. This is just the reality. And the teaching that Paulden's drawing on are some of the most beautiful words. They're in the Dhammapada, where the Buddha says, and this is the practice, we can do this. This is the Dhammapada, verse 3, 4, and 5. And it's worth memorizing. He abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those who carry on like this, hatred does not end. She abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those not carrying on like this, hatred ends. Hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hatred alone does it end. And the Buddha goes on to say, this is an ancient truth. This is what one of the most, there's so many beautiful, everything about the Buddha's teachings is beautiful, but he's clear that he's not making this stuff up. He's just rediscovering it. That this is just a truth. This is just the way things are. Hatred will never end through hatred. It doesn't matter if we're talking about, 5,000 BCE or 2028. It doesn't matter where we are, what we look like, what language we speak. Hatred never ends through hatred. Through non-hatred alone, hatred ends. And the non-hatred comes through the wisdom of not carrying on like, oh, this happened to me and oh, that happened to me. Don't be a victim. The Buddha is letting us not be a victim. Hard things happen, absolutely. And we incur them, absolutely. And some of it seems unfair, absolutely. And yet it's because we don't have a big enough picture. We don't have enough perspective to be thinking it's unfair. It actually is all karma related. And maybe I feel like I was the victim of rape or whatever, but then my predator, it just doesn't end. They're also the victim of, and back and back and back. And when we stop carrying on like this, then hatred doesn't have any fuel anymore, doesn't have any ground to stand on, and it will dissolve. And we see examples of this. We're so fortunate to live in a day and time where we know these stories. We know about Gandhi not returning hatred with hatred. We know about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, was a absolute proponent early in his life of bombing. In fact, he was involved in bombings of the apartheid regime, and then he spends all that time in prison, and goes deep and realizes, no, this isn't going to work. It's more of the same, and did something completely different, and brought so much healing to that country, and to the world, and into our own hearts when we let it in. So there's this. I said I was going to speak about two things, and I'm kind of segueing. So this importance for us to be understanding and developing this heart, this attitude of metta towards life, towards ourselves, towards others, towards our circumstances, towards climate change, towards everything. And I'm sort of segueing into an aspect of spiritual practice that we all, every single individual, has to begin to understand and have a relationship with, and that is idealism. And invariably, we all have a strand of it. We all have a flavor of it. That's why we're here. We're looking for something more meaningful. We're looking for something that's more reliable. And invariably, we have this thread of idealism in us. And yet, if we don't come to see it and understand it, it can sneak up on us and choke the lifeblood out of our hearts, out of our motivation, and we can dry up and get judgmental and critical and frustrated. So how to be in right relationship with idealism? This is so the Buddha's way. It's to find this middle path, to find this middle way. Some people just throw out the idealism, they water down the teachings, and they just let it be, and no goals, because then I'm going to strive, and this is one extreme, and then the other extreme is to become quite fundamentalist. And fundamentalism is I will go as far as to say fundamentalism is a fetter that we all have. And it doesn't get talked about very much, but when someone experiences the first stage of enlightenment, when they experience stream entry, there are 3 fetters that are pulled out, that are snapped, that are broken, that are cut off, and will never grow back like a palm stone. And the first gets talked about all the time. It's identity view. You think that there's this individual, permanent soul, spirit, self inside of yourself, and this is the thing that is the biggest delusion that we all are under. And the second fetter also gets talked about a lot is doubt. Once you have that insight, once you have that realization, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what the Buddha says about reality is true because you've seen it. Sometimes the simile gets given of like you're heading up a mountain, but the mountain is completely covered in mist and fog, and you've never actually ever seen this mountain. It's kind of what we're all doing, right? We're all being told, go that way, there's the path, and we're all like, wherever we are, we're all like walking along it. And then when you have that experience of stream entry, it's like there's a flash of lightning. There's this complete insight, and you see the mountain. So of course there's no doubt. That's the second fetter. The third fetter that gets wiped out at stream entry is a wrong relationship with rites and rituals. It's this idea that if I do X, I will get Y. It's this idea. It's fundamentalism, right? It's I've got it right, and so I've got it right. So everyone who doesn't have it the way I've got it, they don't have it right. It's like this. It's a terrible thing, and we're all susceptible to it. It's simplistic. It's black and white thinking. It's a fundamentalism, and there's just no. You might think, there's not a fundamental bone in my bone. Oh yes, there is. I'm just telling you because it's true. It's a fetter, and we all have it. So I'm going to read a paragraph that has been instructive for me, and it's interesting. I now don't agree 100% with everything in this paragraph, so I'll just give a caveat. And this is from Norman Fisher. He was the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center for a long, long time, and he's a poet, and he's a well-known Zen teacher. And he gave this Dhamma talk like almost 30 years ago, and it's entitled White-Robed Monks of St. Benedict. It's online, and he's talking about the 8 stages of monasticism, and you can extrapolate it just to the 8 stages of my own spiritual practice. And this is in the introduction, and he's basically talking about there's a little monk or nun in every one of us. And this is the idealistic part of us that is the seeker, is the searcher, is the spiritual seeker. So this monastic life, a way of wholeness, a sacred way, an ideal, lives at the bottom of each of our hearts and is reflected back to us in religious experience and religious literature. But as we know, ideals can be poison if we take them in large quantities or if we take them incorrectly. In other words, if we take them not as ideals, but as concrete realities. Ideals should inspire us to surpass ourselves, which we need to aspire to do if we are to be truly human, and which we can never actually do exactly because we are truly human. Ideals are tools for inspiration, not realities in and of themselves. The fact that we have so often missed this point accounts, I think, for the sorry history of religion in human civilization. When we believe in ideals too literally, we berate ourselves and others for not measuring up, but no one will ever measure up. That's the nature of ideals and their beauty. So at their best, and if rightly understood, ideals ought to make us pretty lighthearted. They give a sense of direction, the North Star, which is comforting. And since they are by nature impossibilities, why worry? Just keep trying. So for me, he's gone a little bit too far. I think he's making an incredible point that ideals are tools. That for me is the point that he's making. But in the Buddhist teachings, the ideals actually are possibilities. The Buddha makes that incredibly clear. Are they incredibly high? Yes. And does it take an incredibly long time? Probably. And I've actually since heard Norman Fisher speaking, and I think I want to be careful, but he was actually speaking about enlightenment. He was on a panel, and I thought some of the things he was saying were not what I've understood from the things I've read in the suttas. I want to say that carefully, but I do think that this point is beautiful, and I rarely hear people speaking to it. The ideals are tools for inspiration. They're out there, and when we take on the Buddha's middle way teaching, where we don't throw them out, but we also don't go too far over to using them to beat ourselves up or to be super judgmental and critical of other people. These two extremes are unskillful, and they don't serve us in our spiritual practice. But we want to be careful in our spiritual practice to not be berating ourselves. I was in an interview not long ago, and this woman, very sincere Buddhist practitioner, beautiful practice, and she goes, I know I shouldn't be mad. It's like you're trapped. And I was like, actually, you know what? She goes, because that's what the Buddha says. And I'm like, actually, you know what? Almost everything the Buddha is saying is because you are mad. Like, he's come, he's giving us these tools because we have, all of us, a lot of anger inside, a lot of aversion. It's like 1/3 of our problem, at least, all this aversion. So when we go to this place where I'm not supposed to feel this, what do we do? But I am feeling it. You're trapped. So this is where we can pick up the ideals in a way that are actually making things harder. And we all do it. We all, should on ourselves a lot. We were walking, I don't know, about maybe a month ago, Bodhipala and I on a hike with a good friend, and she's going to spend some time with her mother, and like extended time, very conscious time, taking leave from work. And then she's like, and so I have to do all this like inner work before I go, so it's not a train wreck. And Bodhipala was just offering, like, you have to? What about if like you want to, and you feel inspired to, like, we do this. I have to do this, and I shouldn't be that. And this is where we're picking up the ideals, and we're picking up the Buddha's teachings in a way that actually hurts us. It is not helpful. And we all do it. I mean, we just do. We have not just our culture and our conditioning. It is a fetter inside of us. This, this is at the end of the Metta Sutta. I'll end here just to circle back to Metta, the end of the Metta Sutta. When we're not clinging, when we're not attached to fixed views. This is that idealism. May our minds be open. May our hearts be open. Not undiscerning, not with some guardrails, of course, but the flavor of the mind, the flavor of the heart, giving people the benefit of the doubt. These are beautiful places to come from. Just a deep well of compassion and forgiveness, and understand there's not a big difference between what's going out and what I'm delivering inside. So when I'm harsh and critical and judgmental of others, it's just a mirror for me. It's a gift. Oof. So how am I talking to myself? So I'm going to stop there, but may we speak to ourselves with words that are gentle, pleasing to the ear, lovable as go to the heart, courteous, desired by many and agreeable to many. Yeah. So I'll end there, and would very much invite any comments or questions.